So in this section 4.2, OzVe Shalom, Netivot Shalom, we're going to have a look at this movement, this one movement which was the result of a merger of two movements in 1984. But let's go back first to 1975, when in fact OzVe Shalom, Strength and Peace, was an organization founded by a small group of religious intellectuals, and the aim, the idea behind the foundation of this organization was to counteract the political assent and the philosophy of the group called Gush Emunim, the Bloc of the Faithful, which had been established a year before in 1974. And Gush Emunim, you have some bibliography on them in your list of books on the website. Gush Emunim promoted Jewish colonization of the West Bank, which they addressed with the biblical name of Judea and Samaria, and this was a central part of the Messianic vision of this group. I remind you that this group was disbanded in 1984 by law because it was considered to be a terrorist organization, but in the 10 years that it existed, that it continued to exist, it promoted colonization and settlement in the occupied Palestinian territories very vigorously, and it managed to leave a legacy of that places colonization and settlement at the center of a vision of redemption, of national redemption. Just to give you an idea of the differences between these two groups, among the founders of OzVe Shalom, we have someone called Uriel Simon. Uriel Simon was born in Jerusalem in 1929. He was the son of the very well-known philosopher Akiva Ernst Simon, who had been born in Berlin in 1899. And I mean, this goes back all the way to a peace organization that had been established in the mid-1920s, which was called Brit Shalom, the Covenant of Peace. And this was a group of intellectuals that proposed the creation of a binational state in what was then mandatory Palestine, starting from the bottom, again, starting from cooperation from below. And the father of Uriel Simon, the person whose quote I'm going to read you in a minute, was also the founders of another organization called Ihud that we have encountered when in our second week, when we spoke about conscientious objection at the very beginning of the foundation of the State of Israel, actually still in 1947. So Ihud, from the root in Hebrew and in Arabic, one, unity, was a binational party established in 1942. Now, his son was a professor of Bible at the University of Bar Ilan and one of the founders of this organization, OzVe Shalom, Strength and Peace. So, Uriel Simon, just to give you an idea of the differences between OzVe Shalom and Gush Emunim, wrote, and I quote, "The difference between us and Gush Emunim is that we love the land of Israel and want peace. They love peace and say they want the land of Israel. The difference is that they say, all the land of Israel complete now, and peace will be brought by the Messiah. And we say, let's make an effort to get to peace, and all the land of Israel complete will be brought by the Messiah." So, as you can see, there is end of quote. As you can see, there is an inversion of perspective here that I will not repeat, but the idea is that let's make an effort to get to peace first, and the whole land of Israel will then be in peace, as it will be, and that will be the arrival of the Messiah, as opposed to let's settle and let's stay in the land and let's make it complete now with our own strength, and then eventually the Messiah will bring peace. So this is just to give you an idea. The strength and the weakness at the same time of this movement was that it was all made by intellectuals, all born in the 1920s and 30s in Eastern or Central Europe. Some of them were born in Israel or in mandatory Palestine from parents that had immigrated from Eastern or Central Europe. Most of them were scholars of religious matters and teachers or professors at one or the other university. In Israel, you have here some names, and the quote that I read was in fact by Uriel Simon. Now, the objectives of this movement was to strengthen the moral and spiritual texture of Israeli life, and to, at the same time, being faithful to Jewish values and to the principle of the Torah, and especially peace and justice. And I'm going to read now from the first bulletin in English that members of OzVe Shalom published in 1982, where they declared their objectives. So let's read together. OzVe Shalom is a group of Zionist religious individuals that works to strengthen the spiritual and moral thread of Israeli life. We believe that a Jewish state should be faithful to Jewish values and to the principles of the Torah, especially in the matters of peace and justice. We are very concerned for the drift of Israeli politics, especially within the religious party, that threatens to undermine these supreme values in favor of an unlimited territorial ideology. So the first point to raise is the definition of Zionism. Zionism is not is considered here in a very different way than it has been defined by other NGOs that we have seen, for example, Zochrot, or that we have seen in class number 1, or in other women's organizations that we have seen last week. Zionism here is considered a legitimate national aspiration and is not considered an obstacle for peace nor for the self-determination of the Palestinian people. On the contrary, it is considered to be the proof that Palestinians actually have the same right to self-determination. And I'm going to quote here from Ofir Yarden, who was one of the founding members of the organization, who spoke again to Cristiana Calabrese in July of 2012, and he said, "What is this story that the right to self-determination stops after the Zionist movement? Palestinians too deserve a state exactly for the same reasons or for similar reasons. So I think that not only it is possible to be Zionist and at the same time support the right of the Palestinian people to build a state, but I also think that it is Zionism that pushed me to be open to the aspiration of the Palestinian people who want a state." So this is a very clear point that Ofir Yarden is making. So these are some of the theoretical standpoints. No idolatry of the land. Zionism as nationalism and right to self-determination valid for Jews as well as for Palestinians, and going back to the principles of peace and justice contained in the Torah. Now, OzVe Shalom had a number of educational objectives that were directed mainly at Israeli society and at Jews outside Israel. One of the primary activities, one of the main points here was the idea of becoming aware, of gaining awareness, which is something that we have already encountered several times. For example, again, when we were speaking about Zochrot in the first week. We can read again from the bulletin. Our members meet a group of Israelis from all religious and political streams. We are particularly interested in spreading our vision among religious youth movements. We also work in lobbying on government officers, and our information campaign included, at the time, a newsletter in Hebrew, leaflets on relevant themes, appeals, and public protests on the Israeli press. So, there is an Israeli press, but there is a network of supporters in other countries, and therefore publications are also in English and in other languages, among them German, for example. On the bulletin of March 1982, we can read how this group tried to lobby, if you want, or to reach Jews abroad in the diaspora who were distancing themselves from Judaism because of the policies of the State of Israel. So in the bulletin we read, "We are eager to reach those Jews who are distanced from the official politics of the State of Israel and see that the Torah is often invoked to defend these policies that could cause their estrangement from traditional Judaism. Christians and Muslims that see Zionism as an oppressive and military force are helped by our publication to see a standing which finds its roots in the Bible that challenges their negative stereotypes on Israel." So this educational objective was really very marked, and was again directed at Jews outside Israel, at Israelis, at Jewish Israelis. But the idea was to try to reach as many people as possible in order to show them that a religious path did not equal necessarily the oppression of the Palestinians. In 1984, the movement decided to join another religious Orthodox movement for peace called Netivot Shalom, Paths of Peace. Netivot Shalom was a slightly different organization. It had been established after the Lebanon War in 1982. We have seen now that many peace organizations were established, in fact, after 1982. In the sense, it was a very important watershed. And the members of these organizations, unlike those of OzVe Shalom, remember those were born in the 20s and 30s, came from Central and Eastern Europe as an origin, as a background. These were young Orthodox Jews, many of whom had fought in the Lebanon War and had lived it through to live the uselessness of the war. And this is something that we will find also in the next organization of Orthodox Jews for Peace, Rabbis for Human Rights. But many of them were born also in the U.S. Between the 40s and 50s. So there is sort of a generational differences between the two, but these two organizations. But the two organizations, OzVe Shalom, Netivot Shalom, who now have a shared website, started to campaign and work together and shared a number of campaigns, in fact. I will just give you some examples. The first one that came to mind while I was preparing the slides was the participation, their joint participation to the demonstration organized by Peace Now on 4th of February 1984 to commemorate 1 year after the killing of Emil Grunzweig. And they also organized a prayer for Grunzweig a few days before that was held in front of the office of the then Prime Minister Yitzhak Shamir. There were other prayers and prayers as protests of other groups, for example, of Rabbis for Human Rights that we will see in the next slides in front of the house of the Prime Minister later on, or in front of the Great Rabbinate of Israel. So this, in a way, OzVe Shalom, Netivot Shalom, set a precedent that other groups would take up later. In August 1984, in the mid-1980s, they organized a demonstration to ask the Israeli parliament, the Knesset, to promulgate an anti-racist law to stop the violent activities of Rabbi Meir Kahane. Rabbi Meir Kahane was the founder of the party Kach, that had won a seat in 1984. We will return on this, as these groups staged what they themselves called the anti-Kahane campaign. That was particularly painful for them as Orthodox religious Jews, also because Kahane was could be identified as well as an Orthodox religious Jew. So for these groups, it was particularly important to distance and differentiate themselves from them. And just to give you another example of an activity of these two groups, in November 1989, they organized a prayer in front of a prison, the prison of Eyal, for the pacifist Abi Nathan. We will meet him next week. Abi Nathan was one of the main characters of the peace camp in Israel and one of the founders of the radio, The Voice of Peace, Kol Shalom. And among a number of activities of peace, symbolic activities that he conducted, there was one. He flew to Tunis to meet Yasser Arafat in 1988 in defiance of the Israeli law that prohibited any Israeli from meeting or for having contact with members of the PLO. He was therefore jailed, and our group here, OzVe Shalom, Netivot Shalom, held a prayer in front of the prison. But what this organization is most well known for is the anti-Kahane campaign that I mentioned earlier. Now, the members of the movement became convinced that it was necessary to counteract the racist and anti-democratic tendencies that they saw existing and developing within the Israeli Jewish Orthodox world. And for them, when Rabbi Meir Kahane won a seat with the party Kach, in 1984, that was the sign that that Israel was growing within itself a very strong ethnocentric and racist stream, if you want. On the English Bulletin of 1984, in the autumn 1984, we can read, Meir Kahane is but a symbol of a more generalized social disease that goes well beyond the 22,500 voters that allowed him to pass the electoral threshold. A recent survey of the Van Leer Institute has shown that 25% of the young Israelis show anti-democratic tendencies. When one asks them if they believe in democracy, they tend to reply, of course. But if one asks them if Israeli Arabs should enjoy the same rights and advantages, the section of our youth says no. So the challenge is to translate the abstract concept of democracy in a practical engagement in favor of the rights and of the well-being of the minority. So the anti-Kahane campaign went on in 1984-85. And in 1985, it started to gain some strength. So I'm going to read again from the English Bulletin of the summer of 85. We, from OzVe Shalom and Netivot Shalom, have decided to intensify our anti-Kahane campaign as we feel that our used method, the publication of pamphlets, group meetings, use of the mass media to spread our ideas, are not sufficient. Our challenge is to fight fire with fire, without submitting to the vulgarity and negativity that we are fighting. After much discussion, we have decided to use the approach of Kach, of distributing leaflets to reach the largest possible public, expressing our adamant refusal of the arguments of Kahane. Our members have disseminated in the whole state of Israel 10,000 leaflets. The main targets are the areas where Kahane makes his speeches. After his arguments, we inundate mailboxes of the residents with our leaflets. On each leaflet, one can find our address with an invitation to contact us for more information. First of all, the leaflets explain to the citizens that Kahane is desecrating our tradition, endangering Israeli democracy. Given that surveys reveal that a high percentage of Kach supporters has a religious background, it is imperative that we reach the traditionally observant areas with our arguments that deepen their roots in the biblical and rabbinical sources. So fighting fire with fire did not only mean inundation of leaflets in mailboxes, but also confronting the group or the party that you believe is misinterpreting or viciously presenting the same sources that you give a completely different of which you give a completely different interpretation. At the end of the 1980s, this movement changed its approach, changed its strategy, and tried to create a direct political influence by establishing a party called MEIMAD, which is the acronym of Jewish State, Democratic State, Medina Yehudit, Medina Demokratit, but the party did not cross the 1% threshold to enter the Knesset at the 1988 elections, and therefore it didn't go through. So the tradition of the peace movement in the Jewish Orthodox camp now passed on to another movements that we will see in the next set of slides. And we're now talking about Rabbis for Human Rights. Follow me there. Thank you.